Hi, I'm Mike Donnelly, and I'm here in Spain. I'm with Peter Porambachinov, who is head of the Bulgarian Homeschooling Association, and he's asked me to say a few words to you, and I'm very glad to be able to do so. It was a real pleasure for me last year to be in Bulgaria and Silistra and meeting with many homeschooling families there. And some of you may be seeing this, and so I say hello to my old friends and hello to my new friends. And I wish you God's best as you take on this important and exciting challenge of homeschooling your children. It's a great adventure, and you're doing the right thing for your children by choosing to homeschool them. And we've had a great meeting here, and I had the opportunity to address a crowd of homeschoolers and internationally interested people, and talking about the basis for homeschooling as a fundamental human right. And when you look at homeschooling in the area of human rights internationally, homeschooling is not explicitly mentioned, but the right of parents to choose the kind of education that their children should have is talked about in a number of different documents. First, you find it in the 1948 United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights in Article 26, Part 3, which says that parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that their children should receive. This is a fundamental human right, and of course it's a reaction to what happened in Germany before World War II, when the German government nationalized the education system and made it a crime for parents not to send their children to the Nazi schools. And so after the war, all the international community came together and said, we can't have this happen again. We've got to make sure that parents' right to choose the kind of education that their children should have is protected. There are several other documents that recognize education. The International Covenant on Social, Political, and Cultural Rights, and the International Covenant on Social and Political Rights, which recognize that parents have a right to direct the religious and moral education of their children. And it says in these documents that the states must respect this right. The European Convention, signed in 1950, also recognizes this and says that parents have a right to ensure that their children's education conforms with their religious or philosophical convictions. So international law looks at the parent's right and considers that it is a human right. So why is it then that there is such controversy over home education? Well, when you look at the objections to home education, and I've traveled all over the world and dealt with many, many situations in America about home education, there are three basic objections that most people, whether they're your neighbors or whether they're government officials, give about home education. They talk about academic outcomes, they talk about teacher qualification, and they talk about socialization. So in the first place, we're not going to trash the public schools and talk about academic outcomes because they're not so good coming out of the public schools anyway. But when it relates to teacher qualifications, there have been many research studies which show that the training, education, and certification of a teacher is not correlated with the academic performance of the child that they're teaching. In America, we've done many studies that are related to homeschooling on this, but also many studies that have nothing to do with home education that show that teachers who have more education do not create smarter students who do better on tests. So that's just irrelevant. There are three things that make homeschooling really effective that educational research has shown are best practices for education of children. Number one is high levels of academic engagement with material. Number two is an environment that is safe and nurturing. Number three is that they learn from someone who cares about them as an individual. When you look at these three factors and you compare a public school environment to a homeschool environment, in a homeschool environment you have much more time for children to actually work with the educational materials that they're using. In schools, there's so much disruption and lots of other things that are going on that children don't really engage with the materials in schools as much as they can at home. Number two, the environment at home is usually, almost always, much safer and much more supportive of the child, where the child can learn in a very safe way, without fear of ridicule, without fear of being called dumb by a teacher, or by being called dumb by their peers because they're having a little bit of difficulty learning something, or maybe they want to ask a question but they're afraid if they ask a question that they'll be laughed at. At home, you don't have that. You have somebody, usually the mom, who loves their child and wants to see that child really learn and cares about that child. And of course the environment is very safe, and you can protect your children from a lot of the physical problems, difficulties that happen in schools, all the peer pressure and the gangs and other things that happen in a lot of public schools today. So that's talking about the teacher element of homeschooling. Of course, socialization. This is a subject that's always brought up when people talk about homeschooling. When people bring this question up, of course, it reflects an underlying argument that schools should be places where children are socialized. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's the role of schools. I think that's the role of parents, to socialize their children, to decide how their parents are socialized. But let's look at socialization. What kind of socialization do children get in school? They are stuck all day long with children who are the same age, with one adult. Is this the real world? This is not the real world. This is a fake world. This is not how real life is. In a homeschool, they're with other children or with their family or with parents and adults, and they learn to interact with a wide range of people. They go out into the real world where they learn life skills. They can interact with lots of different people, and parents have the ability to bring them out into the real world a lot more. Certainly they're going to stay home and study, but they can have much more time to go out and do field trips and educational activities that allow them to really live in the real world and deal with real people. So we'll talk about socialization. In school it's not so good. Parents in homeschools can really help their children learn and become very productive, mature members of society. And in the research in our country, in America, where we have 2 million homeschooled students, the studies show clearly that homeschooled students do very well. They go on to college, they get jobs, they become very productive, involved members of our society. So, thank you, and I wish you God's best as you undertake to think about homeschooling. If you're already homeschooling your children, I encourage you. I think you're doing the right thing. And if you're thinking about homeschooling, I encourage you to get in touch with Peter and the Bulgarian Homeschooling Association and learn more about all of the benefits and how you can homeschool your children in Bulgaria. God bless you.